So anyway, planet gone, all rocks and dust, but the human race lives on, spread out across the stars. As soon as the Earth burns up, oh, they get all nostalgic, big revival movement. They'll find this place. Same size as the Earth, same air, same orbit, lovely. Core goes out, the humans move in.
What's the city called?
New York.
Oh, come on.
It is. It's the city of New York. Strictly speaking, it's the 15th New York since the original. So that makes it New York. What?
It's so different.
New Doctor.
Okay, so you're probably wondering where the first York came from. So we have New York in America, and America was to be the new Atlantis. So this was done through the York Rite. The York goes back to Egypt. And where does Egypt go back to? It goes back to Atlantis. So, Atlantis, the fallen angels, the Anunnaki, or Naki, remind you anything? Nazi, maybe? So, you have the tribe of Dan, which is the Anunnaki. Dan goes back to Don, or Donald Trump in New York. The elongated skulls. Okay, so this all goes back to Mars. The Atlanteans, or the fallen angels, or the Anunnaki, used to reside at the North Pole of Saturn, but Saturn was removed from the North Pole. So they lost their ability to travel from Earth to heaven and from heaven to Earth. This is what's called the engagement ring, with the North Star, or the diamond, at the top. Now, the engagement ring, when they had their spacecraft, this is where they would engage. They had to be within this circle when they're approaching the North Star, so they can shoot up through the firmament. This is the only hole there is in the firmament. And I'm not even sure if you can go past there at this very moment or not. I'm not sure if you can go through with an aircraft or spacecraft, but so we have Marvin the Martian. So you think of Centennials, you think of Senators, Trojans, they all wore this headgear. It's because that's the Martians, the ones from Mars, or Moors. Rome is just more spelled backwards. So, Sidonia would be the original York, or at least as far back as we can go. So Egypt would have been based upon this, and then they're trying to do it again in New York and America. And this video game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Manhattan Project, is telling you something subliminally. Okay, so that's Manhattan, New York. So that's New York. This is a floating city. Remember my video about Atlantis being a floating city, or Atlantis City being a floating city within the ocean of Atlantis? The reason why they did that is because they didn't want to migrate. They just figured they'd have a floating city, because they were dealing with the problem that they were living in a four-season climate. So the only way to deal with that would be having a floating city. That was their best way around it. So you have marsupials. That's interesting. What else was I going to show besides Donald Trump? Okay, so I showed you that. So let's look at the word Mars for a sec. So the word Mars in relation My zoom's not working right. So you got marathon, march was an important one. Marijuana. Why is my focus not working? There we go. Margarine, that's interesting. Margin. Maritime. Okay, what's a maritime? That has to do with like a mariner. That has to do with outer space. And market. That's outer space lingo. Marlin. Marshall. Marvel, that's a big one. Marxism. Look at MER. Merlin. So Mary. MERR. Merry-go-round. What's a merry-go-round? It has to do with orbiting. MOR. So that's where you get moral, morbid, more. Again, more with the mores. Where you get mourn or Mormon, morgue, Morpheus, and mortal.